Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carolyn McCollum, and as the co-chair of the ZSR Library Lecture Series, I would like to welcome you all to today's event, a reading by North Carolina's Poet Laureate Joseph Bathanti. Mr. Bathanti was born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. After graduating from the University of Pittsburgh, he came to North Carolina as a member of the Volunteers in Service to America, the VISTA program, and was assigned to work in Mecklenburg County's Huntersville prison. On his first day of training, he met fellow volunteer and future wife, Joan Carey, who's here today. They have been married for over 30 years and have 2 adult sons. Currently, Mr. Bathanti is a professor of creative writing at Appalachian State University, where he is also director of Writing in the Field and writer-in-residence in the university's Watauga Global Community. He has taught writing workshops in prisons for more than 3 decades and is former chair of the North Carolina Writers Network Prison Project. He is the author of 8 books of poetry, 2 novels, and a book of short stories. He has received several literary awards and honors, including the 2001 Carolina Novel Award and the 2006 Novella Literary Award. He is the recipient of a Literature Fellowship from the North Carolina Arts Council, the Samuel Talmadge Reagan Award, presented annually for outstanding contributions to the fine arts of North Carolina over an extended period, the Linda Flowers Prize, the Sherwood Anderson Award, and others. In 2012, he was appointed by Governor Beverly Perdue as the 7th North Carolina Poet Laureate. After Mr. Bathanti's reading, there are copies of his 2013 book of poetry, Concertina, available for purchase and signing. We also have complimentary copies of one of Mr. Bathanti's poems featured in Concertina, The Dogs at Salisbury, available for signing. And these were printed on the library's letterpress by our preservation librarian, Craig Fansler. So without further ado, Mr. Joseph Bathanti.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. I'm really glad to be at Wake Forest. Joan and I we really have connections at Wake Forest. Our older son, Jacob, went here and graduated, I think, in 2009. I'm pretty sure. We do know he went here and had he had a great run, and we loved just being part of the community in Wake Forest, which is, a legend in North Carolina and beyond. And we also have 2 other very stellar Watauga County high school students. Bethany Miller, who's are you a junior now? Bethany's a junior, and then Sebastian Ivory. You're in your 2nd semester of your freshman year, correct? So we feel really at home, and thanks so much to Z. Smith Reynolds staff, and to Carol in particular, and Craig. The broadside's just beautiful. I can't thank you enough. And I will be delighted to answer questions after I'm done, if folks have it. So thanks. And Chris, too, thank you for your hospitality, and it's just good to be here. The book that I have out most recently is called Concertina, and I'll just tell you a little bit about it. I'll probably read mainly out of that book since it's the one here for sale, and the broadside comes out of it. In 2006, I think it was, I published a novel called Coventry, which was a prison novel. And what didn't get into that book, the shavings, the cuttings, the chaff, whatever it was, I almost instantly began then cobbling together poems after that book was published. And the result was this book I'm going to read from. I came to North Carolina, as Carol said, in what year was that, dear? 1976, yeah, 1976 as a VISTA volunteer. I'd just gotten out of graduate school at the University of Pittsburgh. I grew up in Pittsburgh, and I always say that I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I had a really long list of things I couldn't stomach the thought of doing. So what I did is I applied to be a VISTA volunteer, and my first choice was Montana, just because I thought Montana would be an extra cool place to go. But because I was a generalist, meaning I had graduate credentials in English literature, which meant I couldn't do anything, as opposed to a plumber or a carpenter or a lawyer, a physician, a nurse. Truly, they sent generalists into the North Carolina Department of Corrections. So one day I was in my mother's kitchen, the next day I was on a prison yard. The transition seemed that abrupt. And truly, the very first day of training in Atlanta, I met Joan. We just randomly were seated together, and then we were sent to the same project together, and then we got married. It was almost a contiguous process, as a matter of fact. So I'm going to just start with a poem called Sweet Random. What happened was there were a bunch of kids. You know, Joan was only 20. I was 23. And folks from all over the place, mainly from the Southeast, but a few Yankees, as Joan called them, I among that heathen horde. And we all went to our VISTA boss's house. He had an apartment, a pretty small apartment in Charlotte, and we all stayed there just right on top of each other for the most part until we could find our own places and then begin work at our project. So this is called Sweet Random. That first week on the project, the four of us new Vistas crashed at our boss's cramped flat. A Jewish girl from Bayonne, a Cuban whose preacher father was locked in Castro's Havana jail, a girl from Atlanta, and I, a Catholic from Pittsburgh. Crammed together as we were, hot as fire, no air conditioning. At night we drank outside, smoldering, as if on the brink of raising every prison in North Carolina. One day, after a long, fruitless search for my own place, the Atlanta girl, Joan Carey, emerged from the tiny bathroom wrapped in a towel, chestnut hair pinned atop her head into the full early evening, sun blazing through the windows. The towel, buttery gold with wheat stalks in full blonde raiment, clouds of pale chaff in the pollinated light of what would be another long, sultry August night in Charlotte. She and I, up to that point, had been friendly, even circumspectly affectionate. Dazed by the sight of her and nothing but a towel, the sun stealing over us, I knew little of her, perhaps less of myself, purely nothing of the lives of caged men. I envisioned prison as purgatory, a colossal furnace hoarding chits on me. Above all, so help me God, I felt blessed by those shackled men pulling my time in the forge. Forsaking home for toil among convicts, it had been rectitude I desired, an apparition bare and reckoning as an angel with a flaming sword. Ahead of me beckoned Sweet Random. All night I held it seared against me. Now I'll read the title poem. Concertina, you'll see on the cover of the book. The cover of the book is a musical instrument. Concertina is an Italian squeeze box, but it's also more colloquially and more prevalently, I'm sorry to say, that awful razor wire that crowns prisons and often parking lots, and it was used frequently and still is in combat as ramparts to keep people in or to keep people out. And for me, it's the most salient image of prison anytime I see it. Concertina. Alias razor wire, fashioned after the free reed bellows drive instrument, patented in 1844 by Sir Charles Wheatstone. Early in its history, Rimsky-Korsakov's Flight of the Bumblebee was arranged for English concertina. used as ramparts in World War I. You've seen archival photographs of soldiers dangling still, lovelorn as puppets in its trusses. Simple barbed wire garnished with spun helices of high tensile yield, various calibers and blade profiles, a colossal slinky ribboned with scalpels that incise vertically and horizontally at once, an Italian squeeze box, manufacturers' names like Excalibur, Flight Guard, Whistler, Nemesis, the Prodigal, so conceived that once snared the convict, reflexively thrashing, panicked as it flinches into him, ravels himself through a meat grinder. In the sun and moonlight especially seductive, the intermezzo, the climactic hemorrhage. I'm going to read a poem called Women's Prison. Something I guess I wasn't ready for in 1976 was the fact that women go to prison too. So one of the things that they did with New Vistas is that they gave us a tour around Raleigh to the various institutions. Central Prison was one of the places we went to, and Women's Prison as well, and Polk Youth Center, and just kind of took us around. And I remember stepping on Women's Prison on the yard for the first time and seeing all these women in just blue shifts, kind of just straight kind of dresses, and they looked to me so blameless. You know, they looked like my aunts or my mom, and there they were in prison. And that was part of the acculturation, I think, back then. I was born in 1953, and the paradigm for a criminal was a man, you know, just always a man. That's what the culture had led us to believe. So I'll just never forget that. And then, one of the things that Joan and I both did, we work with an ex-offenders organization in Charlotte, and what that organization would do is that, not every Sunday, but I think it was 2 Sundays a month, we would get the children who belonged to the incarcerated women, load them on a bus and drive them to Raleigh to visit their moms. That's another hidden cost of prison, of course. When if a mother goes to prison, she leaves children behind. I've done some work in battered women's shelters, and it never occurred to me either that when women flee their house, they do so precipitously, and they get a garbage bag full of clothes and toys, and they take their kids with them. So battered women's shelters also are just kids are running around everywhere because the moms, of course, take the kids. So, so this poem is called Women's Prison. Two Sundays a month, darkness still abroad, we round up the kids and bundle them into a restored salvage Bluebird school bus, repainted green, and make the long haul to Raleigh where their mothers are locked in women's prison. We pin the children's names and numbers to their coats, count them like convicts at lights out, sucking thumbs, clutching favorite oddments to cuddle as they ride, curled in twos on patch-sprung benches. They sleepwalk bashfully, the little aged, into the belly of the bus, eyes nailed to its floor. We feed them milk and juice, animal crackers, apples, stop for them to use the bathroom and to change the ones so young they can't help wetting. We try singing folk tunes and strike ballads as if off to picket or march with an army of babies, but their stony faces will not yield, and finally their passion to disappear puts them to sleep, not to wake, until the old Bluebird jostles through the checkpoints into the prison. Somehow, upon reopening their eyes, they note a smile at the twirling, jagged grandeur surrounding the massive compound, concertina clotted with silver scraps of dew and dawn light, a bullet-torn shroud of excelsior scored in dismal fire, levitating in the savage Sabbath sky. By then their mothers in the last moments of girlish raw-boned glory, appear in baggy sky-blue prison shifts, their beautiful hands lifting to shield their eyes like saints about to be slaughtered. As if the light is too much, the sky suddenly egg-blue, plaintive, threatening to pale away, the sun still invisible yet blinding. Barefoot, weepy, they call their babies by name and secret endearment, touch them everywhere like one might the awakened dead. The children remain dignified, nearly aloof in their perfect innocence and self-possession, toddling dutifully into the arms of anyone who reaches for them, even the guards petting them too. When visiting hours conclude, the children hand their mothers cards and drawings, remnants of a life they are too young to remember, but conjure in glyphic crayon blazes, attempting to recollect the narrative that will guide them back to their imagined homes. The mothers peer from the pictures to the departing children, back and forth, straining to make the connection, back and forth until the children, already fast asleep in the bus, as the bus spirits them off, disappear. I'll read a poem called Raskolnikov, who is, of course, the famous hero or anti-hero of Dostoevsky's famous novel Crime and Punishment. And my big area in graduate school was 19th century Russian, and then I reread Raskolnikov after I'd come to North Carolina, and I'd always carry a book around with me when I was on the yard, and so during downtimes I remember rereading Crime and Punishment on a prison yard. And so I imagined Raskolnikov in this poem as being a contemporary for 1976 inmate doing time at Huntersville Prison. Huntersville was the prison I was assigned to. Was then a tiny little town north of Charlotte. Now it's not so tiny at all. Raskolnikov. Ragged, head shaven, yellow from months of cabbage and cockroach soup, he arrived on the transfer bus from Siberia. The full lick as he offed a pawnbroker and her sister for no good reason, then refused to cop a plea. When he caught this jolt, his old lady, a beautiful chick named Sonia, followed him all the way from St. Petersburg to live in a trailer behind the quarry so she can visit with him an hour and a half on Sundays. He got put in an honor grade road gang, cutting right away for the tar squad with a bush axe. Number 2 gained time, but he hacked off his toes, one by one, for the hell of it. The shrinks have their usual kicks with this phenomenon, but they are chilled by his Minnesota multiphasic personality inventory, and he sees the Grand Inquisitor in the Rorschachs. They know he's not just another Bughouse John playing possum, running the dozens. Goddamn Russians, they sneer, throw him in segregation on a steady diet of Thorazine. First day back on the yard, he gets written up for eating tree bark and denouncing Chaplain Ray, makes a beeline for the fence, then climbing, gets hung up, spread-eagled, concertina jigging through his guts. Beneath him, convicts gather, trying to say his name. Okay, it's not easy to lighten up these poems, but let's try. Let's try right this minute, right this instant. I was going to say that's the funniest poem I have, but a lot of you all, thank goodness there are a few of you who were born early enough in the century to remember the old PTL club. Do y'all remember that, Jim Baker and Tammy Baker? When I came to North Carolina, again in 1976, I had never seen it. I knew nothing at all about it. And the first time I saw it on television, I thought that it was a comedy. I just did. I just thought it was a straight-up comedy, that it wasn't for real, if you could call it for real. One day, Heritage Village, which was the PTL compound, and you young people who don't know what I'm talking about, just Google Jim and Tammy Baker and the PTL club, and you'll get some fodder. In other words, so Jim and Tammy Baker invited 5 inmates, 5 felons in this case, to go down to Heritage Village and be on the show. And I took them. I drove a prison van, a big white prison van with these 5 guys, all of whom I knew by that time, and we drove down to Heritage Village in the van. What's more, the day before there had been some kind of scuffle on the van, and a guard had maced a couple guys to break up this scuffle. And the fumes had not dissipated. And the only other thing you need to know about the poem, once we got there, Jim and Tammy wanted these 5 guys, and they were sitting right in the front row of this big TV studio, to, on a count of 3, we rehearsed it. They were all gonna, the cameras would shift to them, the mic would come up to them, and they would say, "Praise the Lord," okay? So we rehearsed that and rehearsed that. So those are the things that you need to know. Praise the Lord. And indeed, praise the Lord. I was so new to North Carolina, I thought the PTL Club a satire in the vein of Saturday Night Live. Jim and Tammy's spoof of televangelists was brilliant. I laughed, even after I found out the truth. When I arrived at Heritage Village, the PTL compound with 5 invited black felons outfitted in forest green honor grade, the Bakers met us in the parking lot. Sobbing, we lurched from the white prison van. The day before, 2 guys had been maced in it for pulling shivs, and the fumes hadn't dissipated. Interpreting our tears for transports of the spirit, Jim and Tammy began to cry and took us, one by one, into their arms. Their lavish grounds had an etched storybook opulence, as if traced from a template and its colors coded in. As we strolled the packed studio, the guys affected, as they often did in public, a stoic gangster nobility. Upon their faces, a cross between glowering and bemusement. More than anything, glad to be out of the joint for the afternoon, but ready to run in a heartbeat. At a predetermined time, the inmates were to exclaim ensemble during the show. When the cue came, "Praise the Lord." We rehearsed it a number of times. The guys loved seeing themselves on the monitors. They waved and mugged like kids. Then we were live. Jim's smile and big lapels, Tammy's face in the fiery stage lights, Andre Crouch and the disciples singing gospel litany of praise the Lord, drizzling over the immense crowd. We saw on the monitors what free folks at home saw as they watched us on TV in their living rooms. At intervals, the inmates flashed among the mendicants like returned prodigals. Then, from the offstage sound man, they received their cue. He held up finger number 1, Jim suddenly holding the mic like a torch to their shocked faces, as on the count of 3, each camera in the studio pivoted toward them. They said nothing. Neither smiled nor moved, as if God, in His almighty wisdom, His good taste and discretion, His infinite love for the very least, had struck them stone. I was very proud of the guys, and I was so surprised. I just didn't know I didn't know that one was coming, but it was too much. You know, I will read a poem that's called Certainty. And it's sort of funny, I think. And it's that very first August, we were in Charlotte. And we were at a really crazy party in Charlotte with our Vista boss, Jim. We had all come in his car, and he had one of those really tiny Hondas, if y'all remember the very first Hondas that came out. Some of you will and some of you won't. They called them roller skates. They were really tiny. So we come out of the party, 8th Street in Charlotte. I don't know if you know the neighborhood. It's a really cool little neighborhood. In Jim's car, the Honda that had been there all night parked, was coming down the street, down the middle of the street towards us, just coming down the street. Certainty. That was such a relief when that light went off, actually. You know, especially since I'm reading prison poems, you know. I feel like this is a parole hearing almost, you know. Far from home, penniless, food stamps, everything from Goodwill. I live with Joan Carey, a Baptist girl from Tucker, Georgia. For $80, we leased a Charlotte attic across from Detox and Memorial Stadium and worked in the prisons. My family in Pittsburgh wondered what I was doing for no wage and why, all the way down in North Carolina like some agitator. The certainty I lived in then made me happier than I've ever been. One torrid August night, 3 a.m., we barged out of a party at the Weavers. Joan and I and Jim, our Vista boss. We had come in Jim's tiny Honda, brown, homely, tires the size of saucers. We were headed for Krispy Kreme up on Independence, the hot donuts now neon, about to announce yet another epiphany in that enchanted tropical August. Joan was 20. Sundresses I remember like pets from my childhood. And Jim, so young and confident. Inside, they danced to Thelma Houston's Don't Leave Me This Way, setting fire to Hallelujah, the last sacrifice of the summer. Hearts and windows shattered across the Queen City. Glad to be together, we stepped into the street toward the car. The night was far from over, yet up in the huge magnolias early morning cast its thermal hush upon the revel. The three of us saw it. At the same time, Jim's Honda, somehow detached from its station at the curb, rolled down the middle of A Street. An automobile, inexplicably animated with sinister purpose, as if we tripped unwittingly through the scrim segregating us from that other world where things happen for no reason at all. Jim and I intercepted it, backpedaling as it pulled us toward the intersection until we finally halted it, inches from catastrophe. We looked at one another and laughed. The way convicts ambling Huntersville Yard laughed about building 30, 40 years in the penitentiary. Guys my age who wouldn't see the streets again until after the sons Joan and I would one day parent had grown into men and left home. The laugh Joan and I exchange all too often when the unimaginable hurtles into an otherwise placid day. The laugh I think of now is fear. So this poem is called Crying. It's quite an elegant water glass. Yes. Certainly beats those bottles. I mean, my heavens. Have y'all seen those teardrop tattoos that people have sometimes? A lot of people in prison get them, and there's a lot of different interpretations of them. Sometimes, if it's been said, if somebody loses a buddy, somebody close, that they have it tattooed as a kind of commemorative tattoo. So I have a little epigraph here from somebody named Andrew Lichtenstein. Convicts of all races frequently have teardrops tattooed directly below their eyes, giving them the appearance of permanently crying. He's a poor white kid from nowhere, a little X in Anson County called Cairo, half ghost town, a few trailers, amnesiac farmsteads, forsaken cropland shanked into the Chesterfield County line, South Carolina. Doing his time here at Huntersville, he's only 70 or so miles from home, but home might as well be Cairo, Egypt. He'll never see his folks again. None of them can read or write. The car seized up and chalked in the demented swales long ago. He's probably just old enough by a day to fetch adult time in an adult camp. Bad luck, no guardian angel, no cross to lift him, wouldn't know a crucifix where it pounded through his heart. Scraps of black down stitch his lip and chin. He'd fall apart in his mama's arms. off to himself on the yard at a picnic table, under one of the big shedding oaks with a cigarette, gazing at the evergreens on the other side of Mount Holly, Huntersville Road, the free side of Steele, just a few feet beyond where he sits, smoke clouding about him. The guys wear their coats snapped, hands pocketed, turn their backs and lean into what's ahead. Maybe Christmas. Christmas is free to everyone. This kid, collar hiked, one of those Castro honor grade green caps pulled over his square white forehead, black brow. Tattooed beneath his left eye is a single blue teardrop needle into him. In a Salisbury Street shot house, decent speakeasy, a Sugartown crack house, no telling. Or how he found his way into one of them. The bad has a way of democratizing itself. He says he doesn't know why he did it. He doesn't know why he's done anything. And often when you talk to folks in prison, they will say that. I don't know why we did it. I mean, we say that too. People say that. Often we don't know why we do stupid things or unkind things or illegal things. And this is an oversimplification, but people go to prison and find themselves in state joints because they're poor and uneducated. We incarcerate nearly 3 million people in the United States, more than any country in the whole world. And a lot of them are young people, and a lot of them are mentally ill, and so I'm going to read a poem called Teddy Bear. Now it has a funny title, and that's all I can offer in the way of humor. This is just about a guy I knew at Huntersville who was the yard maintenance guy. And when he got paroled, he ended up finding a home across the street from Joan and I, where we were living, down the street a little bit, which was not the abode I would have had him living in if I had had the choice. Teddy Bear. Hearing Harold Furr was the baddest man in Huntersville prison was a revelation. Pudgy, he had a beard that looped like a horseshoe ear to ear, a Conway Twitty pompadour, and the mustache of a 13-year-old. Nicknamed Teddy Bear, he worked unit maintenance, a smiling, round felon in green fatigues and tool belt, toting a ladder and a can of WD-40. He looked like my school janitor. There's no real way to know what a man is like by looking at him. Baddest meant something, but I didn't know what it meant. How could I, a free man, a school teacher who knew when to lower his eyes and walk away? Still, in my romantic way, I fancied myself a kind of outlaw when after class, Teddy and I sat and talked at the yard picnic tables. As if the world had done me wrong too. To say he and I were friends is a stretch. We got along just fine, but I knew if I so much as licked a stamp for him, he'd have me. Paroled, he rented a place unbelievably at the bottom of my street. Occasionally I'd spy him, shirt unbuttoned on his big white belly, walking Freedom Drive home from his job at Gordy Tire. I'd stop and give him a lift. Things were going okay, nothing to it, he'd brag, with a big hairy smile. I'd drop him at the little bungalow he was fixing up. He always shook my hand, told me I was good people, and invited me to a standing Friday night poker game. Every Friday, I thought of showing up, becoming one of them, a man who could gut out anything, a jolt in prison, the hell kicked out of him, the grease and bust of working with his back for grub wages, chain smoking and drinking cheap beer in simmering danger, bluffing a whole table of ex-cons and bikers out of a jackpot. But in truth, I'm not such a man. Yet all my life, I've had to convince myself of this. Affronted or wounded, I plot revenge, but it's merely rhetorical. Mostly I brood. It would not cross my mind to shoot someone. I've never fired a gun of any sort. Teddy, on the other hand, must have offended the wrong person. It's pathetically easy to accomplish. Bump a bet once too often, rat hole your winnings, pull up stakes prematurely. You might even good-naturedly remark at another's unusual luck. Scrape a pot to your chest with too much relish. The list is endless and capricious. You are completely unaware that you've slighted anyone. People grin boozily, shake hands, and assure you they enjoyed it. They'll see you next Friday. But when you're asleep, they return, not merely in your dreams, but through the front door. And that's that. A convoy of screaming police cruisers, strobing blue the pre-dawn street, yellow vinyl crime tape winding around the pine trees in Teddy's front yard. So every Friday night I would say to Joan, I'm going down to Teddy's. I'm going to go down there and play poker. And she'd say, no, you're not. So we had this kind of ritual, you know. And truly one night, a gangland-style hit, Hell's Angels, came in there and executed everybody. Listen to your wife. Let's see how I'm doing. I'm doing okay here, I think. Maybe I'll read 2 more poems, and that way there will be time for questions, which I'm glad, really glad to answer. And I'll read the poem that there's the beautiful broadside that Craig engineered called It's Just Beautiful. Thank you so much for that. It's called The Dogs at Salisbury. When we arrived in North Carolina, the North Carolina Department of Correction, the prison system was still mired in a lot of the old chain gang days, but also trying to move out of that into a treatment model, a less custodial model, community corrections, alternate sentences. In a lot of ways, it was much more progressive, I feel like, than it is now, trying to reduce the population, et cetera. But that all changed. In 1980, a couple things happened. The hostage crisis, for one thing, and also Ronald Reagan took office as president and sort of changed a lot of laws, and we began to move towards a much more custody versus treatment model, 3 strikes you're out, et cetera, and the prison population just expanded exponentially. But when we got there, they still had bloodhounds. And they might now, for all I know. So if a man escaped and got out into deep country, they had literally a bounty hunter who went horseback and bloodhounds who were trained by inmates called dog boys. They trained the dogs, and they would go out on escape after whomever it was. And if you've seen Cool Hand Luke, it's as close to that model, if you will. And certainly the prisons Joan and I worked at, the road gangs, Forsyth County has one. Back in the old days, I think every single county had one. So Cool Hand Luke is kind of the paradigm for this, although the inmates in Cool Hand Luke had a much more sentimentalized version of the relationship among the men. They aren't really that cuddly with each other. The dogs at Salisbury. The bloodhounds were caged in a skirmish of wire lots, the same wire that penned the convicts, along the left field line of the Salisbury Camp softball field in Rowan County. Doped and clumsy, the dogs paced their tiny allotments, waiting to be sprung on the trail of some wayfaring booster turned rabbit. The penitentiary contracted an old fire-faced free man named Luther to run down escapes they couldn't collar once into deep country. Bounty hunters, what he amounted to, went horseback, convict, Stetson hat, khaki work fatigues, cartridge belt, and pistol. An awful throwback man and no believer. A band of lifers, dog boys so-called, strange and beholden to Luther, tetched from too long in jail, ran on all fours if need be with him on the track of an escape. They babied those dogs like lovers, loosed them on long chains and swabbed their faces with the ratty, tattered gray bunk clothes their prey had slipped out of just before dawn shift change among the guards. Luther cantered up on a sorrel gelding, rolled a tailor-made from a can of stud, sat there in a scud of smoke, then wordlessly led them out. It had a stylized filmic tint to it, but stripped of movie stars and allegory, just Shackle and Leviticus, the infernal antebellum geography, impenetrable wet burning green, Luther, his catamites, and a pack of chain gang bloodhounds, their obscene shimmy and piss, the slavering coiled bray, Jesus dragging his tree through swamp and nightshade. And I'll close with a basketball poem. Ed Southern is here. He's the executive director of the North Carolina Writers Network, as a matter of fact, and we're glad he's here. That organization does extraordinary work all over the state for writers and readers everywhere, and it has meant a lot to me in all my fellow writers over the years, and I know Ed likes basketball and all things Wake Forest, although this isn't a Wake Forest poem per se, but it is a basketball poem. And certainly my condolences to Wake Forest, too. I know that my alma mater beat them in the ACC tournament, and while I was rooting for my alma mater, I took no particular pleasure in that. I especially wanted them to beat the next foes that they faced, because we're obviously Demon Deacon fans because our kid went there, and we know all the teams we're supposed to hate, and we do. So there are a lot of great athletes in prison. So there are these leagues. The guards had a softball team, and they had a basketball team, and they would travel to the different units and play either softball or basketball, depending on the season. And the guards could always hold their own in softball, and often we're very good, because it can be, you're a big, giant person, and you stand there and you hit the ball out of the park. You grunt, and you hit a home run. Basketball is a different sport. And the inmates used to just wear out the guards in basketball. I always like to say it was like 5 Michael Jordans versus 5 Elmer Fudds. Man, they would just waste them, and they would go coast to coast the whole time. And it was their way of getting legal revenge, of course, and the guards would get really hot about it because the inmates would, talk junk and give it to them. And this is what this poem is about. It's called Flate, F-L-A-T-E, which was someone's Christian name, Flate. His Christian name was Flate, but they called him Flight. Fly mainly, 6'8", with hands so big, fingers so long they looked drawn on by Romere Bearden. He was black as Rhodesia, and nobody, guard or convict in the South Piedmont area, could even half shadow him on a hoop court. He had had a full ride to Barba Scotia and Concord before he busted into a funeral home jonesing for formaldehyde one night and caught this time. When Flates 5 from the Camp Tar Squad played the guards at the old Huntersville High gym, Sergeant Ford took Fly man and they rigged the box and won. Ford was all county at Garinger in '69, but Fly was something extra over. Each time he schooled Ford, the Camp 5 keened like a choir, chanting deathless junk that befuddled the guards. Ford's screws threw their towels and insulted the ref. They played dirty, but the convicts took it. Nothing they didn't know about dirty. Fly never betrayed the game, stuck to the facts, dribbled like sharpening a shank. The ball in his hand was a ripe, astonished peach. It simply disappeared. His leap, an exaggeration in the rafters, all sky, then whoom! 2 more for the bad guys. Thank you. Thanks so much. Thank you.